Hello, and welcome back to Mandibil. Before I dive in further into this series of videos, I would like to thank all the new subs I've got recently. As far as I remember, in my in the back end of YouTube, there was more than 30 new subs within a month, which is sort of 10% increase in a month. And you have to appreciate what you get. And looking at percentages, it maybe is a better idea for me than comparing myself to Joe Rogan or something like that, right? At least in numbers. But also, there seems to be a lot of new people who are very keen on chipping in with various comments and criticisms, both of mine and of Bernardo Kastrup, and that which are the topics I'm dealing with, and so on. And sort of criticizing my ontology, and I very much appreciate that. Though I might not be as show up as appreciative as I might be, but sometimes I also try to push back a bit and see, okay, have you actually gotten this right? I don't want to take, blank criticism as gospel, right? Or criticism as just as blank gospel. What would you say? What would you? What's the term, right? Um, It's like if somebody come, there's a problem there, fix it, right? It's sort of, yeah, okay, hang on, dude, right? But it's good to, I like pushback, right? But as I say, this ontology of mine and basically the rest of my philosophy is a constant work in progress. There's never anything that is sort of finally settled. That's one thing I have realized doing philosophical stuff, right? There's always something that can be improved a little here and a little there, and it can be rephrased with a better word, and you can keep going, right? Be careful with people claiming to be philosophers who came up with a system 5, 10, 15 years ago or whatever, and are just staunchly defending that. Any criticism, right? They haven't developed. They have created some story that is a cover-up story, I would say, for an underlying narrative that was already there before they started philosophizing. They are just solidifying themselves in what they already believe in, so to say. It's an ex post facto justification of whatever they were already thinking, right? You see that all over the place, right? I actually, and you guess you have to believe me, I really want to get to the fucking best philosophy you can possibly get to. That means I have to constantly challenge it. I can't just say I came up with it, right? It just dawned on me and there it was. It cannot possibly work that way, right? So just be, I'm very, I'm a, I have a streak of perfectionism in me. But it's a particular special kind of perfectionism in the sense that I'm able to say this is good enough so far, but I'm not willing to say it's perfect, right? I can have a notion that as I progress, I might sort of converge towards, as asymptotically or whatever you want to say, towards something that is perfection, though I don't think you can get there, right? It is perfect for you, but it's not necessarily perfect for everybody else, right? So this universal idea of purity and perfection, it's a fantasy. But that doesn't mean you should just give up and throw in the towel, right? So it's like I like to approach perfection with the knowledge that I have to at some point say this is good enough for rock and roll, right? Close enough for rock and roll. There's an old Nazareth album called Close Enough for Rock and Roll. I can recommend that one. Um, I I heard a French psychedelic rock band the other day. I am sort of in modern times. It seems I grew up in the 70s, right, with all the rock music from I was about 4 or 5 until I was 14 and 15, right? It's sort of a kind of formative years of your musical abilities, right? I grew up with the 70s, right? Very influenced by the 70s. I should have been more influenced by new wave, but I weren't. I was more influenced by classic rock, right? So in later years here in the new millennium, maybe you could say, right? To me, the music hasn't had the same level of quality necessarily. Not there's not as many bands that were good back then, and they don't create as much good music as they did back then. But it might also be because the more music there is, the harder it gets to find your own little niche, right? So you have to kind of repeat what other people have done, and you don't want to do that. So it might be a problem actually creating new interesting music. But this French band was not really new in the basics of the sound or the instrumentals is bass, guitar, and drums, right? But the way they did it was like it was sort of haunting sound. It's sort of this psychedelic, slightly spacey kind of Pink Floydish maybe sound. There were sort of traces of Pink Floyd to me, right? I was like, wow, this is actually it's interesting because it's a new, but it plays on some old stuff, right? I don't think you can avoid it at this point. So it was the purity of the instruments is a trio. They are called Slift. So I never heard about them before, right? But they have made a few albums, and I was mesmerized by the music, right? And I don't why did I talk about that? But maybe it's about this thing working and working and working, and we're coming up with some coherence. Because, you could also say philosophy is rather reactionary at times, right? It's you have to be a reactionary, a kind of reactionary. You can't this thing. Hey, somebody came up with a new philosophy over here, and they're just you calling it a specialism, and they're using some new terms, right? Very much like Bernardo Kastrup and his ilk, right? Oh, it's analytic idealism, and now we call it consciousness only ontology, and sort of okay. So old wine and new bottles, maybe, right? So it's actually reactionary, but it calls itself modern idealism, right? So now it's a new, it's better, it's improved, it's sort of quote, right? I'm not necessarily biting on that one, right? It's the latest, the most recent update to philosophy. I think it's a good idea to get back to basics, right? Because you will inevitably end up philosophizing in midstream, as Ayn Rand said, right? And I'm not a Randian. Let me make that clear, right? But I actually like that description, philosophizing in midstream. It's just, okay, I want to philosophize about this. Just going to start. I want to be an epistemologist, so I'm going to make some epistemology over here. You sit out of nowhere starting in the middle of the project, right? Somebody wanting to build a house. I think I'm going to make the bedroom now. No, we have to sort of get the whole thing right. You can't just start with the bedroom, right? So there's some reactionary. I guess I don't know if it's the best term to use, reactionary, but get back to some kind of basics and then build up from there, right? And that's maybe what I'm trying to do. But I'm appealing to things have to evolve. I have to go back to the 70s to find some inspiration in music, and bring it back to the present day, sort of, metaphorically, right? Okay, let's jump into monistic idealism and Bernardo. And by the way, I'm jumping to timestamp 1638, decoherence and the cosmic mind.
The next one is just David Pearce. So he's a British idealist philosopher. He calls this view non-materialist physicalism, but it's idealism. He thinks that
non-materialistic physicalism. Yeah, but now they're just labels, right? It's like it's a non-animalistic animal. Non-living animal. I don't know.
that when you So one of the things with cosmopsychism and analytic idealism, etc., is you get a cosmic mind at the end of it. It's a logical endpoint. But he says he's expressed some concerns that decoherence threatens the unified cosmic mind. So just quickly, I know you know what decoherence is, but some of our listeners probably don't. It's basically a view that can be viewed as the loss of information from a system into the environment. So often modeled as like a heat bath or something they would call it. So since every system is loosely coupled with its energetic state of its surroundings, so if it's viewed in isolation, the system's dynamics are non-unitary, and although they're combined, system plus the environment evolves in a unitary fashion. It uses its information. Anyway, it's a little more than that, but
yeah. That was a decoherent description of decoherence, right? Oh, incoherent description of decoherence. Whatever, dude.
Okay. Decoherence is a merely operational notion.
What I'm reminding myself is that I think that one of the things that Bernardo Kastrup does that appeals to a lot of people, there have a few other thoughts, but he's very eloquent in his use of words. He's quite good at framing some idea or some philosophy, or using eloquent words that don't seem offensive but comes across as somewhat inviting and sort of lures you in, right? I have to give him that, but that doesn't mean they're correct just because it sounds good, right? The rock and roll hits of the 70s, or the radio hits, or the chart hits are not necessarily best music, right? Eine kleine Nachtmusik is not necessarily Mozart's best music, but it's the most famous, maybe, right? So it's his eloquence is sort of his best bet for getting traction, right? Because when you scrutinize what he actually does, it starts to come apart very quickly, as I pointed out in recent video series, right? But there's also another thing that it's just, a little out on the left field here, right? But there's something about his, I don't know if it's more like a female attraction, but there is a theory that women like, let's call it foreign men, right? Because it's a new and diverse, DNA. Let's just put it that way, right? They're attracted to the tall, dark, and handsome, right? He's small, white, and gnomish, right? But anyway. But he has this sort of Antonio Banderas, Latin, what's it, not dialect, but what's it called? Affection? No, not affection. The way he phrases words, using influenced by his sort of Latin background, right? That gives it sort of a charm. It gives a certain charm. I would give him that, right? And I think that makes it easier to listen to him. And I have, it's an idiosyncrasy of some kind, right? That I struggle to understand what the hell is going on in me, right? But I don't think I'm sort of, it's a common thing, right? That when I listen to some people, they're just easier on the ears than somebody else is, right? When I listen to I listen to a lot of videos and speeches and talks and presentations and lectures, whatever, right? Whatever it is, right? Whatever you want to call it. And there is just some people who rubs me the wrong way, the way their voice sounds, the way they present themselves, or that's just something that just, even if I want to say to myself, just listen for Christ's sake, right? Just listen to it. Just avoid, ignore the idiosyncrasies. I can't. It's like at some point I have to stop and go somewhere else, right? There's some are on the borderline. If it's very interesting, I can sort of deal with it, right? But Bernardo Kastrup surely for me is in the category of somebody who's easy on my ears. But that doesn't mean I'm going to eat whatever he says just because the way he sounds is approachable to me, right? So I think he's rather approachable to many people, and in particular, I think Latin people come across as more virtuous when it comes to religion and woo-woo and so on, right? If he sounded like, I don't know, a Muslim, whatever, it would be more like, well, you don't have the right sound to be a right thinker, whatever. I might be wrong on that, right? But it's just as an example of what I'm saying, that I think that it works in his favor. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say. And it's not really it's just, sporadic thinking, right?
It is not a fundamental notion. So what is decoherence? When you have a quantum system in a superposition,
a quantum system in a superposition, right? Okay, yeah, well, you need to explain what that is, right?
That's a coherent system, let's call it that way. It's in a superposition. It's not in a defined classical state. It's in a superposition of possible states. That's what characterizes a pure quantum system. Usually they are microscopic. When you make a measurement on that system, we say that it collapses. Collapse is another operational concept. It may not be a fundamental thing. There may be no collapse at all, but operationally, things happen as if there were a collapse, because instead of a superposition of possible outcomes, now we have a defined, measured outcome. And that happens when a pure quantum system in a superposition interacts with the classical environment, like the measurement probe. And then the information that was contained in the superposition, because of that interaction with the classical environment around it, leaks into the environment and becomes inaccessible. Now, this is an important point. It becomes inaccessible. It doesn't disappear. The information didn't fundamentally evaporate.
How do you know? How do you know the elephant is not there when you can't experience it? How do you know? Maybe knowledge is the wrong term. How do you get to it? How do you settle that? Right? I'm not experiencing it, but it's still there. How does that work? It's mysticism, right?
It has become inaccessible because it now is diluted in a much bigger classical environment. It's like dropping a little drop of black ink in the ocean. It doesn't disappear. It's all still there, but it's diluted.
What do you mean? What does it mean to appear and disappear? That's where your ontology has to be strict, right? Because if I don't experience elephant, I can't say there is elephant, right? That's why my ontology is the cornerstone of the ontology is my cognitions. Because all these fabulations about is this tree still there if nobody's there to hear it falling or whatever, all that shit, right? Well, the answer is I don't fucking know, man, right? All this elaborate, extended knowledge about what is going on in the fucking whole universe, if there is a represented universe in your mind that represents that which you're actually talking about, which is beyond yourself, beyond your own mind, beyond your ontology, right? In an external world. And not just fabulating about, you can know that there's something you should have a cognition of that you don't have a cognition about right now, because you have an idea what goes on beyond your cognitions. This is why where these cloud castles get extended by one abstraction or imagination after the other, and it doesn't work. It's just wishful thinking, wishful imagination, maybe, right? If I experience elephant, I know elephant. If I don't experience elephant, I don't know elephant, right? If you say elephant and I don't experience elephant, I say that proposition is false. To me, right? I don't accept anybody telling me you should be experiencing elephant over there, right? There's something wrong with you. If I don't experience fucking elephant, there's no elephant, right? Or, careful, Mandibil. If I don't experience elephant, I cannot say there is an elephant. That's the way I should phrase it, right? Careful. I might as well say, well, I'm not going to participate in anything that entails the being of an elephant. If I don't experience elephant, I'm not participating in it, right?
No longer can see it. It becomes unrecognizable. So the information, quote, law.
So it's an appeal to authority, implicitly, in my opinion, right? It's like, yeah, you just can't see it. The elephant has been dissolved into the ocean, but it's still there. You have to trust the science, right? You have to trust the philosopher.
Us in decoherence is not necessarily a loss. It depends on how you interpret decoherence. But if you approach it in the most rigorous way possible, you cannot speak of a loss. You have to speak of that information becoming inaccessible. We can go into the math of it, and you see that what I'm saying holds water. It becomes inaccessible. So I don't think decoherence is an argument against the possibility of a cosmic mind. Moreover, even if there were a real loss of information because of decoherence, for you to construe that as an argument against the cosmic mind would require the assumption that any mind has to be unitary. And that's an assumption too. What defines a mind is the experiential nature of its contents. In other words, a mind is
interesting, right? Interesting. This is sort of a begging the question kind of thing. I need to hear that again. What defines, this is important, right? This is one of those, when I listen through this, I spotted immediately that this is one of those I really want to.
Assumption too. What against the cosmic mind would require the assumption that any mind has to be unitary. And that's an assumption too. What defines a mind is the experiential nature of its contents.
Okay. There's a lot of packed into that one, right? If you look at my ontology here, right? All these, what's it called when you have this broken line? I know what it's called in Danish. I don't remember what it's called in English. It's called stiplet linje in Danish. That all this that goes on here, which I have labeled ontology, right? Maybe ontology should actually, I'm actually thinking about doing this in a way where I don't need the terms ontology, epistemology, physics, ethics, because it's descriptive label. It's not something that is in itself. It's the need to qualify and classify things that comes up with these terms that all of a sudden needs a place in the ontology. And I think that's maybe a one of the avenues in order to get to bad philosophy, because you end up with so many terms that you lose, and then you need new terms to describe those old terms, and it just compounds and compounds, right? But what was the term he used? Let me just back up a bit here. Sorry about that.
And that's an assumption too. What defines a mind is the experiential nature of its contents.
Okay, so content, it could maybe be understood in a rather physical manner. Content, it has a notion, connotations of physicalism, right? Or physics at least. So content is when you have made a bag and put everything in the bag, the content of the bag is this. Then mind is a content holder. What's it called? A container. It's a container. Mind, in his description here, is a container. And it's defined by what is in the bag, called mind, is defined by what is in the bag. Right? So, and the phenomena are all these things I have placed here in my... maybe he has a few more. I wouldn't rule that out, right? But at least these are some of them. Like physics, ethics, epistemology, all sorts of abstractions, cognitions, and qualia, and maybe he has a few more, right? This is the contents of the bag. And he says the bag, called mind, or the broken line around this, which if you were to call that mind, is defined by what is in it. It's ridiculous. It's stupid. It's like if you're meeting somebody on the street, they came out from the grocery store, and you say, "What is that in your hand?" "Well, let's look inside it and see what is in there. Then you know what it is." What? If you want to know what a cupboard is, you don't open the cupboard and look at what is inside it in order to figure out what the cupboard is, right? It's a stupid idea. But the whole takeaway of it to me is, it starts with if mind is defined by the phenomena, then phenomena is more primary than mind. He says it right there. It's phenomena that is the starting point. It is not mind. Mind is an artificial label he has stuck on his phenomena. Just like I have made this broken line around here in order to indicate that potential abstraction or synthetic idea of mind. I don't need mind in order to describe my ontology, right? My phenomena. It's just the need to avoid dualism or pluralism. That they have to make it all made up of the bag they put everything into, right? It's like saying all my tomatoes and my bread and my pasta sauce and whatever I have in my bag is made of plastic bag when I get out of the grocery store. It's fucking stupid, man, right? Because the plastic bag is something you came up with after you described those contents of the plastic bag. And then you put it all in a plastic bag, and then you all of a sudden say, it's all made of plastic bag. It's fucking atrociously stupid, right?
In other words, a mind is something that is subjective. It is something that, there is something that is like to be a mind. It's subjective.
So you can be a mind? What is a mind something that is being in the same way as an elephant is being? I wouldn't say so, because that's a cognition, right? That's one of the qualia in that which, in the plastic bag. So the mind cannot be the same as one of the qualia or cognition. The mind cannot be of the same kind as that which is in the bag called mind. He's sort of going around in these conceptual loops, right?
Objectivity is what defines it, not the inability to describe that mind as constituted of mental segments.
Mental segments. Okay, so this is the appeal to the mental superstring, right? It's all made of a little mindness. So because there's a big mind that's made a smaller identical mindnesses, I can talk about dissociations and ripples and excitations because it's sort of localized events within the bigger mind that does what it does because it is what it is, right? At this point, I am classifying this as crazy talk, right? I mean, I have pointed out all the shortcomings of his metaphysics / ontology story, right? It's completely, brain fart, right? It is all it's these concentric or imaginations all the way down kind of approach that ends up being everything is one thing. It's sort of it's a mind explosion of the most extreme kind, right? At what point do we get down to everyday reality in something that I would call everyday reality? At what point do we get there, right? No, he retracts into a mind castle of his mind daddy, and he sits there with his holding the left hand of his mind daddy, right? And never comes back to anything that I can use in my everyday, right? But it's the everyday where shit happens that might not be where you have to apply a moral principle at some point, right? If you go with the idea of a moral principle. So it's like this left turn called metaphysics is a dead end you can't get out of. You can't get back out because you are ending in you're ending up in a begging the question kind of mental cloud castle that is you can check in but you can never leave again, right? So
and that's what decoherence would imply, that you could make partial descriptions of segments of that mind if there is real decoherence in the sense of loss of information. And then one would say, well, that's incompatible with the nature of a mind. Well, I would argue against that too. So that would be the second line of argument against this hypothesis that decoherence rules out a cosmic mind. You can have a mind that is not in a complete superposition. We call it a dissociated mind. And we know such things exist. Human beings can become dissociated. We are dissociated all the time. Every time you don't remember something, you are dissociated.
Really? And that's again this appeal to we. We all know this. You just accept whatever somebody is telling you. You just pay attention and accept what somebody tells you that this is knowledge, right? No, you can't hand over knowledge, right? I have to experience whatever it is I call knowledge in order to claim that knowledge. I can't just listen to a sound and say, okay, that sound is now knowledge. Somebody mentioned elephant. Now I know elephant. No, that doesn't work. That's actually against foundational foundational empirical epistemology, which I suppose that he supports because he's so fond of science, right? He actually attempts to use it in his ontology, which is stupid. What was it he said? I need to rewind a bit.
We are dissociated all the time. Every time you don't remember something, you are dissociated.
What? If I don't remember it, how do I know I should remember it? It's sort of this is a very easy kind of appeal to dissociation, right? It's very loose kind of argument. Every time you forget something, it's because you dissociated from that which you, right? But that entails the story he tries to prove. He has the idea of dissociation, and then he comes up with something that he describes as that dissociation as an argument for that dissociation he has already decided is there. No, I don't buy it, right? It's too convenient kind of argument that is so hard to, because if you're dissociated from something, if it's this idea, you have a mind that that you cannot judge whether or not there's something beyond, right? Beyond or before, maybe I should say, which is maybe a better approach, right? A more correct approach. So because I can't say, well, I don't know if there's something beyond my experiences, right? What would that even be, right? I mean, what is beyond experience? It cannot be experience, otherwise I might experience it, right? So it must be something different then, right? That would, in any case, be a line of reasoning that I would support. But he says, because he takes advantage of the inaccessibility of the experience to say, aha, that's why you're dissociated. You should have that experience, but you don't have it, and that's because you're dissociated, right? It's this kind of, it's sophistry, right? It only, analytic idealism only works if you have a prior understanding. You have to have a narrative, because the narrative is that which has to be confirmed by the philosophy. The philosophy is not that which is foundational, but it's the story that you're fitting around the philosophy, or you're fitting the philosophy. You're adapting the philosophy to a prior thinking, a narrative. It's so prevalent, I would say. And because of the nature of his presentations and his philosophy in general and the shortcomings, I would say that he's just trying to form fit philosophy around a narrative that he wants.
And you can characterize these two sides of dissociation independently of one another. In other words, they don't need to be in a perfect superposition. So that would be the second argument. Now, a broader comment now, not necessarily an argument against this, but more generally speaking, information, pardon my English, information is a bitch. It's a very difficult concept in physics and information theory and mathematics. It's in some sense similar, well, it's very similar and related to the second law of thermodynamics. That is one of the most precarious ideas in physics. We can't even define it in a rigorous enough way, and yet it seems to be there. So when we speak of whether information is there or not, what we almost always mean by it is whether we can access the information or not. And that's different from whether there is information there or not.
Yeah, but we need to be there to define what we mean by information. If I say cow, is that information to you? Well, it might be information to somebody standing next to me who's looking for a cow, right? But if I say cow here, would that be information to you? I don't know. It's like I have to experience that which I classify as information. So I have to have an ontology. I have to have an understanding of existence and knowledge and such. Information is data that is valuable, but the value is something I attach to it, right? So information is subjective in the sense that yes, it's information if it's valuable or useful, maybe I should say, to me, right? But if somebody calls me on the phone and says there are 33 llamas in my town, you could say it's information, but I don't give a shit about it, right? But if I observe 33 llamas outside my window, it's kind of information to me because it might influence, it might be valuable to me to understand that they are there, and I have to approach them in some way, how to deal with it, right? The problem of the 33 llamas. Maybe that's the title for my video, the problem, the decoherence of my 33 llamas, right?
In the context of the second law of thermodynamics, if you have a cup of coffee and a cup of milk, you say, well, I discern the information there. One cup is black, the other cup is white. So there is a difference between the two states, and therefore there is information. But if I mix the two cups in a third, now I lost that information, because now there's only brown, there is only one state. There aren't two discernible states.
Maybe the information isn't there anymore. It's based on your cognitions. If you no longer, if I cognize, soft ice, right? And I say, well, that's information to me. I would like that. I'm going to eat that soft ice. And all of a sudden, I don't cognize soft ice. Well, I'm not going to say, there is a soft ice there. No, there is a soft ice. And I'll try to eat that which I no longer cognize. I'm not going to do that, right? So it's about cognitions. Cognitions are so central to this. It can only be information if you experience it. And it's valuable to you, it's useful to you. Then it's a subjective categorization, or a subjective understanding of your particular cognitions. And the abstractions you are attached to it. Information is a kind of abstraction about a cognition, right? And then these academics and the intellectuals, they go into all sorts of loops of a mental masturbation that then they end up the decoherence. And it's like, shut the fuck up, man, right? Get down to the basics. And don't come up with everything is made of, my groceries are made of plastic bag, right?
Anymore. So information has been lost. No, we cannot access that information anymore. But if I were a...
So it is still there. But how do you know if you're not cognizing it? These are limitations of knowledge, man, right? Limitations of insight. The limitation is that you shouldn't extend to know things yet that you're not experiencing. It's still there. The coffee and the milk are still there. They're just mixed up in the ocean. No, they're not really there if you don't experience them, right?
Microscopic Maxwell demon, and I could dive into the cup with the mixed...
Yeah, but you can't have a Maxwell demon because it's an overload of... You have to have a complete picture of everything, right? And you can't have that information locally about everything. It's a knowledge limitation, right? As soon as you change things, or things change in one moment to the next, then you have a new complete picture of everything. In order to, it's ridiculous, this demon thing, right? Maxwell's, I've heard of that before. You take the cold ones and put over there, the hot ones and put over there. Then you can mix, or you can work against the second law and put the warm over there and the cold over there, right?
Tea and coffee, and start like a skier going downhill on a slalom, defining a boundary between every molecule of coffee and every molecule of milk, in such a way that to my left there is a molecule of coffee and to my right there is a molecule of milk. And I would slalom down the entire cup in 3 dimensions, defining that boundary. I would have the two states. There would be coffee to one side and milk to the other.
Yeah, but this weird, incredible abstraction called Maxwell's demon is not going to help you get to that state that you are fabulating about, right? If this was happened, that would be the case. Yeah, but that's not philosophy. An if sentence is not philosophy. If I could do this, then I would, right? And therefore, information intact. No, doesn't work.
Other, at the microscopic level, the information is still there, but we can't access it. So
it's in the mind of God. Yes, the information is still in the mind of God. He takes care of that information doesn't, sift away into the big ocean, right? Into the ripples.
Use to information, and especially to the disappearance of information, are pretty precarious because they are based on assumptions that do not have a rigorous formulation, let alone a rigorous substantiation.
I really appreciate, obviously all the points you made there, but especially about the lack of imagination that the critics have, where you point out how there's different ways to look at the fundamentality of mind. It doesn't have to be unitary. And it's just ironic because if you point out to the materialists that, well, hey, science isn't able to figure out consciousness like you guys think it can, and they say, oh, well, that's just a lack of imagination on your part. You're concluding it too quickly. But here they are doing that to idealism. So just kind of a double standard on their part. So this one is kind of a two-parter. So as I'm sure you know, there was this big letter. There's 124 people saying that integrated information theory is pseudoscience.
Okay, so this new topic. So I think this will round up this particular video. And all I have to say is, have a nice day. See you in the next.